When we try and define what is working class, what do we need to consider?
Well, obviously, it depends on the context. I'm American, but I work in Britain. I've lived here for a long time. And for anyone who's not British, like myself, it can be very confusing because obviously, in most contexts, you have people who own property, they extract rents, they are the proprietors of capitalism, you could say. And those people are people who earn their living off of other people's labor. That's typically how that's defined. And then there's people who, regardless of how much they earn their own wages and their own subsistence. So by that definition, it's not that there isn't obviously shades of gray. If someone's a Deliveroo driver versus someone who's a tube driver, obviously have different levels of security. But the question then becomes, are you a proprietor of capital? Do you make your money off of other people's labor? That means you're not working class. Or are you working class in the way that that you earn your own labor, your own wages and earnings? The reason why that's an important definition is because then we don't fall into this kind of murky territory of culturalist politics. So, for example, you gave the example of Waitrose and Boots. It's like, okay, so you shop in Waitrose, but you are a renter. Instead, you shop at Iceland, but you own a bunch of property. Who's working class? Well, obviously, the person who shops at Waitrose, who's the renter, because it's about their position in society. If they stop working, they won't be able to subsist. Whereas if someone who earns their living off of other people's labor can stop working for a significant amount of time and could still live just fine, typically.
Right, so breaking it down, and I'm not always the sharpest tool in the box here, Ashok, so bear with me and I welcome your patience. Is it too simple to say that you can class yourself as working class if you're a master of a trade, so if you're providing your labour for something? So someone who's a builder, is that working class?
Of course it's working class. I mean, you could use the tube drivers as an example.
Okay.
Until 1993, until the tubes were privatized, they were the lowest paid on the. I mean, they were making less than £10,000 on average. It's only after privatization happens and private rail operators weren't willing to pay for the year-long time it takes to train them up. It takes a year for them to train up, that their wages were going higher. They also had strong unions and collective bargaining. So I think it's like, well, were they working class then and not working class now? And then the question then becomes, what is it? In this country, I see politicians, Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner, on six-figure salaries if you look at all the benefits they get, and they control the levers of society, still being like, I'm working class. It's very confusing for an American or for anyone who's not from this country, being like, how in the world are you working class? You may have come from a working class background, but people treat working class identity here as this fixed identity. And it's not an identity, it's a relation. That's the distinction.
Okay, you mentioned some of the UK politicians, someone who I think is, and I'm choosing my words to be respectful as possible, which is quite rare for me, someone who occasionally, it might be suggested, plays on her working class roots for political gain is Angela Rayner, who up until recently was Deputy Prime Minister. We all know she had to resign because she got a bit confused over stamp duty. An MP salary comes in at just under £100,000 a year in this country. That's before you get into the allowances, etc. How would we define Angela Rayner?
Well, it's I think it becomes very difficult. These aren't clear-cut decisions, but the issue is really a question of power. I mean, that's where it becomes a very clear distinction. So a much clearer example of this, I think, and not to detract from this, but is someone like Alan Sugar.
Okay.
Alan Sugar is someone who's a multi-billionaire, who has all the affect and the aesthetics of someone who's working class, who comes from that background, and still plays on the fact that I'm working class. And lots of people in this country would say, yeah, he's a working class guy, but some person who went with a university degree who cycles and eats avocados, but is a renter and is basically barely has any, is drowning in debt, would be seen as middle class. So it is confusing when we get into the cultural territory.
Yeah.
So I think we have to look at the substance of it. Angela Rayner controls the levers of lots of power in this country. She earns a lot of money. She has control over her means of subsistence. There's no real bosses that she has. I mean, technically, we are her bosses, but we don't have that much control in the current electoral system. So she's not working class. It's very clear. I think we can use our discerning eye to make that distinction.
It's really interesting, Lord Alan Sugar, and I'm glad you mentioned him. Do you think, and I'm only asking this question because you mentioned him and it sparked a thought in my head, do you think there are people who maybe overemphasize their working class roots because, to be blunt, they've earned so much money, they're multi-millionaires, but maybe there's a little bit of guilt going on there, so they almost over-echo their working class background, or am I being too cynical?
Well, I'll be even more cynical. I think it's not I wish it was guild. I don't think it's actually guild. I think there is a political, let's just say, political capital to be generated. And you don't see that just with class. You see that with all kinds of identities where people will sort of ham it up a bit in order to be a bit of a character and if he's just another middle class guy who grew up in an elite background and went to Oxbridge and then is a millionaire or billionaire, that doesn't make for good TV. That doesn't make for good sort of, I don't know, showmanship.
Yeah.
But there is something to be earned from saying, okay, I'm this character, I come from this back. And that's what I think is even more cynical about it. I think it's fine. I mean, he does what he does. But what I find more, I guess, insidious about it is when that analysis of class becomes more generalized.
And a final thought here. Do you think as a country we are less obsessed or more obsessed with class? I was talking to Gabby, who produces this show, and she was saying in Italy that the idea of working class, middle class and upper class, those kind of labels don't really exist in the way they do in Britain. Are we just too obsessed with this stuff? I
think we're not obsessed with class enough in the right way.
Okay.
So I think it's, there's this phrase from the Occupy movement in 2011 that says, we are the 99%. And of course, that's a kind of vulgar, reductive notion of class. But I think if people really started treating class as the people who own everything and the people who work for the people that own everything, then we can have a more clear analysis of who has power, how do we share wealth more, how do we become a more distributive society, rather than this sort of, oh, well, it's, there's this phrase, I live in East London, they say gentrifier. It's like, well, gentrification or the dispossession of working class people from historically working class neighborhoods doesn't happen because middle class people moved in. It happens because large property developers buy up huge tracts of land and raise rents. So it's misidentifying the issue. And by misidentifying the issue, we find the wrong scapegoats. And I'm not saying blame the rich. I'm saying what we need to do is talk about structural inequality. And that's not going to happen if we keep finding categories. Oh, this person's middle class. What makes them middle class? Because of their accent? Because the way what is it? Because where they shop? Yeah. It seems such a superficial understanding of class. We need to talk about class more, but we need to talk about it in the real way, tied to the economy, tied to who runs society, not to where you shop and the clothes you wear.
It's been a fascinating conversation. Ashok, thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for joining us on Talk. That's Ashok Kumar, Associate Professor of Political Economy at Birkbeck University. So much stuff in there to unpack.